Welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Rate and review the show at kevinmd.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/follow. Today in the show, we have Mallory Salentine. She is a pediatrician and a leadership coach. Her Kevin MD article is titled, Allow Yourself a Moment to Focus on Yourself, Not the Next Patient. Mallory, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin, so much for having me. I love what you're doing and giving physicians a voice when we often feel like we don't have one. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show, writing the piece, because obviously I couldn't do what I do without guests like yourself. And we'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, briefly share your story and journey to where you are today.
Yeah, so thank you. My story really started in medical school and residency in that I had some events that really caused me to have a lot of stress, really caused me to focus really deeply on my patients and kind of forget about myself. And so throughout residency, throughout medical school, I really spent a lot of time focusing solely on the patient and not really thinking about what I needed at that time. And so by the time I started in my first role as a general pediatrician, I was burnt out and I didn't know it because I was so focused on my patients that I didn't have the awareness of where I was and who I was and what I was feeling. And it actually took one of my colleagues stopping me and telling me, you can't do this anymore. You're up all night, you're charting, you're calling your patients, you're doing all these things, and you have to stop that for me to realize and have the awareness of what was happening for me. And after that happened, I spent the rest of my time in my role really looking at how can I find joy in what I'm doing and in my life and for myself. And so that's kind of where my journey started. And now I am leading the physician wellbeing initiatives at my organization. I spent a lot of time focusing on myself while still providing really excellent care for my patients. And I started coaching. I actually hired a coach who really helped me figure out what was going on deep inside that was really causing me to do this. And then with that, I was able to change my life at work. I still work full time as a pediatrician, and I found a lot more joy in that. And so in my coaching practice, my hope is to be able to help other people do this as well, find what really brings them joy, help them focus on themselves and not just on their patients. And then also help leaders to be able to inspire their teams and their physicians to do this as well.
Now, you mentioned that you're the leader of the Wellbeing Initiative at your group. Do you find that the other clinicians that you work with, are they going through similar stories to what you described?
I'd say a lot of physicians are going through similar experiences. I think in our training, we spend so much time focused on our patients, our number one, first do no harm, all of these things that we are really trained that we have to spend all of this time and all of our energy on our patients. We bring all of our energy to work and we spend, 80 hours at least a week as a resident at work. And so we really do spend so much time there. We spend so much time learning. We come out of residency and we're afraid of making a mistake. We're afraid of missing something. We're afraid of all of these things because we're trained so deeply to just really be there for our patients that we kind of stop thinking about ourselves. And so I see that all the time. And I think the other thing that I see a lot of too is feeling like we're not in control, right? In medical school residency, it feels like someone else is dictating everything for us. They're dictating our schedule. They're telling us when we have to be there. They're telling us when we can eat lunch. They're telling us what lunch we eat, right? So we feel like we don't have control over what we're able to do and really who we are. And so once you start in that first job, you feel like you just have to keep doing what you're doing because that's who you are now. When in reality, it's not. It's what was kind of put on you. And so now it's time to kind of find your control again. So I'd say those are the two big things that I see. with physicians.
All right, and we're going to talk more about solutions and next steps in your Kevin MD article that's titled Allow
Mhm.
Yourself a Moment to Focus on Yourself, Not the Next Patient. Now, for those of you who get a chance to read your article, just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it.
Absolutely. So I think there's two big pieces of this article. The first one is that what we witness as physicians, all of the pain and suffering and illness and trauma, we kind of just move on to the next patient after we
Hmm.
see that, right? We just
Yeah.
think that it's normal and it's not normal. So what kind of helped lead me to that is that I actually have, for one, I have a family member who every time I see them, they ask me, what's the craziest thing that you saw since I saw you last? And I always think like, well, I'm a general pediatrician. I don't see anything that's really crazy, and everything seems very normal to me. But when I think about this family member, they're not in the medical field. They don't see these things that we're seeing every day. So all of this like pain and suffering and, the kids screaming in the
Hmm.
rooms, in the patient rooms, to them would be crazy. But to me, it just feels so normal. And it takes so much for me to feel like it's not normal. So it has to be a very significant event for it to feel crazy or not normal. And I actually really noticed this a couple of weeks ago when I was at a friend's house and we were having dinner. And I actually picked up dinner and I thought I did a really good job getting a meal that her child would like.
Hmm.
And when he sat down at the dinner table and saw the meal, he started screaming and he was not happy and he didn't want the meal. He went to the other room. He, kept screaming the whole time. And my friend and I were just kind of like, okay, he doesn't want the meal,
Sure,
right?
sure.
He's doing what a kid normally does. We're okay with that. But her husband, my friend is a pediatrician
Hmm.
also, and her husband was like totally upset about the screaming that was happening
Hmm.
and the tantrum that was being thrown. And he was trying to attend to his child. And my friend and I were just kind of like, yeah, we deal with this all day
Yeah.
long, right? Our patients all day long are screaming and they're fighting and their parents are always freaked out, but we're always just like, oh, this is normal. An 18-month-old comes in for a checkup and screams the entire time, right? 18-month-olds are terrified of
Hmm.
people. And so they just scream and scream and scream. And the parents are so scared and so upset. But for us, we're just like, this is normal. We
Yeah.
just kind of go through our day. And in reality, this is not normal. We've been trained, we've been conditioned, we've been desensitized to all of this that is really not normal. So I'd say that's the first piece of the article. The second piece is that even though we're trained that this is normal, we still likely have some subconscious fight or flight response happening underneath all of that feeling of this is normal. And so whenever we hear kids scream in the room next door, or we have someone who's unhappy, we're likely always having this like chronic fight or flight response. Our amygdala is responding
Hmm.
all day long at our work. So whenever we're at work and we're hearing all of these things and we're seeing all of this pain and suffering, we're likely having this low level amygdala response that we're completely deconditioned to. And so I know we'll talk a little bit about what we can do about that, but I think those are the two big pieces of this article is that one, what we see is not normal,
Hmm.
and two, that we likely are always having this fight or flight response at kind of a subconscious level.
So before we get into next steps and solutions, tell us why those feelings of desensitization and those feelings of a constant fight or flight response, why is that detrimental for physicians?
Mhm. So I think for a lot of people kind of out in the world, out in the community, they don't tolerate as much as we do. We
Hmm.
tolerate a lot. And because of that, we burn out, right? And so we're constantly having this like chronic low level stress that has to be so high for us to realize what is going on in our bodies and what is going on in our brains and for us to burn out. And so this kind of repetitive vicarious trauma, the fight or flight response, all the pain and suffering is likely contributing to our burnout in this like slow burn kind of
Hmm.
way. And when you think about people that are outside of medicine that aren't witnessing these things, when they start to witness that initial piece, they're leaving their jobs. They're, trying to find something better. They're maybe starting coaching earlier, starting therapy earlier, because they're starting to see like these not normal things that we witness every day affecting them.
Hmm.
Whereas as physicians, we don't notice that until it gets to this really significant.
So, what can physicians do to combat some of these feelings?
So I think the very first step is actually similar to what I went through in my journey, is the self-awareness. So
Hmm.
understanding what is happening in your body. So we need to rewire our brains to understand that this is not normal and that we need to focus on ourselves just as much as we focus on our patients. So what I would recommend doing is, when you hear that child screaming, or you just come out of a room of a patient that is in a lot of pain, or someone that brings to you some type of trauma experience that you're feeling a reaction to, when you come out of that room, or when you're, in the hall and you're hearing this, that you take a moment for yourself and you focus on where you feel that feeling in your body. So if you're noticing some tension, like for me, I get tension in my jaw. I
Hmm.
constantly am like clenching my jaw. And so when I start to feel that tension in my jaw, I have to take a moment, focus on that, and release that tension. So that could be, you start to feel a headache coming on, or you start to feel something in your stomach, or your chest feels heavy. I have a client who would tell me that, would tell me all of these different stressors. And I would say, well, where do you feel that
Hmm.
in your body? And she would say, my chest, like my chest will start to feel heavy. And so every time that we would start to talk about stressors, I would remind her, I'd say, where do you feel that in your body? And she would say, my chest. And so every time that we have that noticing of where we're feeling that in our body, the faster that we can get back to healing.
So, how would this be applied in practice? Give us a story or a case study, maybe one of your clients or something hypothetical on how they can apply some of these techniques just on a typical day.
I'll just talk for myself.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, we sit in my clinic with all the patient rooms around us.
Hmm.
So we hear all of the kids screaming. We hear all of, people coming in the hall. We hear all of these things. And even when kids are excited, right? Like we
Yeah.
have Hulk up on the wall and they walk in and they're like, oh, Hulk. And they're just like so excited. We hear all of these
Hmm.
things, right? And so oftentimes kids will be getting vaccines, or they'll be getting a finger poke, or their blood pressure taken, and they're screaming. And we'll hear them screaming and we'll be like, oh, what is my MA doing to my patient now? Like we'll kind of make a joke about it.
Sure.
And that is the time that you need to not make a joke about it. And you need to actually stop and pause and think, what is happening in this moment? And where am I feeling that in my body? And when you feel that, or even if you don't feel it in your body, that's okay. You might not have, again, that reaction because we've conditioned ourselves not to. So if you're not feeling it in your body, that's okay. If you are feeling it, taking a moment, putting your energy to releasing that muscle. So for me, it's my jaw. So releasing the clenching of my jaw.
Hmm.
It could be taking a deep breath. It could be maybe taking a lap around the clinic. It could be, focusing on something maybe outside, focusing on where you are in that moment and being present in that moment so that you can then move on to that next patient. So instead of going from patient to patient to patient, taking that moment to really focus on you and where you are before moving on to that next patient.
Now, as you know, a lot of physicians, they're kind of set in their ways. For you personally, how long did it take before you noticed that these techniques started to make a difference?
I mean, it takes a long time. It's not easy, but we can do hard things, right? We
Yeah.
went to medical school, we finished residency, we can do hard things. So I'd say for me, it has probably taken at least a year to really be able to do this, where now I can have the awareness that it's happening. I think is that first step. Like I'm aware that when the patient is screaming that that's not normal.
Hmm.
and then being able to bring it back to my present self. And there's times that I'm not aware of it, right? There's still times that I make that joke, or there's times that I get frustrated and I'm not present,
Mm.
but I think it's a practice. And so every time that you do it, the easier it gets in the future. And it's hard to do at first. Absolutely.
We're talking to Mallory Salentine. She's a pediatrician and leadership coach. Her Kevin MD article is titled, Allow Yourself a Moment to Focus on Yourself, Not the Next Patient. Mallory, my final question. What are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
I think my take home message is that the more you practice this awareness, the easier it'll be to ground and process and move on. And we can know that this is not normal and we can be aware of this and we can help ourselves to heal from all of these little things that we've seen in the past. And so I'm going to be doing this with you. Just like Kevin asked me before, how long has it taken me? I'm still practicing it. And so I'm here with you. I'm doing this with you. Feel free to let me know how it's going for you. But I think that is the biggest thing, is practicing that awareness that this is happening and then focusing back on yourself before you move on to that next patient.
Mallory, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you.